Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. A long time ago, I was a single mother with a young boy about 7 years old, and I was doing my best to make ends meet with what little money I could scrape together working part-time. We didn't live in the best home, but I did everything that I could to keep him happy, healthy, and fed, and I like to believe that I did a damn good job. I can say that nowadays, things are much better. He's grown, I'm in a new marriage, and honestly, life is much happier. That said, there were times where I made mistakes and where things got really rough. And this is actually about an event where the unthinkable could have happened, and I really shouldn't have brought him with me, but I'm actually glad that I had. Though, I will say that my decisions weren't the worst part. I thought things were okay. I just trusted someone a bit more than I should have. So this was back when my son and I had just moved into a new apartment when he was about 7 or 8 at the most. My husband and I had been divorced for a year, and I was just really getting out into the world after losing the house. There's a long story there that we won't get into. I was working part-time, so I didn't have a lot of money, but I had a family member that was helping me with the rent for the time being, so it wasn't a huge deal. However, after having lived with them for a year and then moving into my own apartment, I realized how much I was actually missing to be self-sufficient. One of the big things I was missing was a vacuum. Vacuums are the one thing that you never think about, and when you realize you don't have one, and then go look for a good one, you come to the conclusion that they are rather expensive. So in a moment of genius, I went out to Craigslist to see if I could find a cheap secondhand vacuum that was at least decent quality. In my mind, if I could find one that I could use and keep for a year at most, I would most likely be able to get the money together to get a good one that was new. And as such, I went for a mid-low price tier when searching. I ended up finding one that I liked, and the person only wanted $20 for the vacuum. I contacted him, everything seemed reasonable, and honestly, I didn't even get any red flags when myself and this person sent messages back and forth about everything. Everything about this transaction seems like it was going to be ideal. Like, I would just bring the $20 and he would give me a vacuum and that would be it. Of course, one of the dumb decisions I did make was being willing to meet this guy at his house instead of a public place. I will admit that I was a bit naive back then, and I hadn't done many transactions online, and I thought that it would be just a 5-minute thing. On that following Sunday, I started heading toward the address that he gave me, and I sent a message saying that I was on my way. I pulled up to the house, and there was a man standing outside on the front porch holding a glass of iced tea, just kind of watching me as I pulled up. I got out of the car and my son followed pretty closely behind me. I thought about telling him to stay in the car, but I kind of thought that would be a worse idea than in a strange place. And as I approached, the man on the porch asked if I was my name, and I said I was. He turned and opened the door and mentioned that I could step in the entryway and that he would go get the vacuum for me. We stepped just inside the door, and the man went over toward the other end of the house and into a bedroom. As he was out of my sight, he kind of started making small talk about the vacuum, saying it was still good and that he has just changed the belt on it, and he apologized that he had lost one of the attachments. After this, he, out of seemingly nowhere, asked if I was a Christian. I mentioned that I was, and because I was taken aback, I asked why that was relevant. He followed it up with, "I was just asking, sorry if I pulled you away from church to do this sale." He came out of the room with a vacuum, and he then continued, "I'm pretty devoted to my faith myself, so I know how important it is to go to church. Do you go to church?" It was a bit weird, but I thought that maybe this man was just really religious, so I mentioned that we hadn't lately because we had just moved and I hadn't found one in the area to attend. He smiled and nodded, like he understood. But then it got weirder, he said. And this is a direct quote because I will never forget his words. "You know, God told me that you would be coming alone, and that if you did, I should take you as mine and run away into the desert." I just sort of stared at him like, "What the hell is wrong with you?" He laughed, and then he said, "But you didn't come alone. You came with your son. I think he was testing me, and this was his way of making sure I'm faithful." I was ready to run out of that house, but I was also afraid that if I did, he would do something. After what was probably 2 or 3 minutes of panic-filled silence, he just kind of pushes the vacuum towards me and says, "Here, you can have it. I don't need the money." I grabbed it and just sort of turned away to leave. The entire time we were walking toward my car, this man was seriously saying some prayer, one that I didn't know, so I don't think it was a real one. I pulled away and drove out of that neighborhood faster than I should have. Thankfully, my son just kind of thought that he was weird, and it didn't really click that we were in the presence of an absolute psychopath. I just kind of laughed and said, "Yeah, he was a bit weird, huh?" And thanked my lucky star that he decided that my son was a reason to not hurt me. That was one of the only times that I ever did any deals off of Craigslist, and it was the only time that I ever did one at someone's house. After that, it was always a store parking lot or other public places. I will also mention that I blocked his number after that, as he did try to text me one more time asking if I wanted to go to his church. I responded with no thanks and then blocked him. Thankfully, the vacuum did work, so I guess that's a plus. So my fiancé and I have been on the lookout for a kitten to accompany our 3-month-old kitten that we already have. We searched and searched until one day he said to me, "Let's look on Craigslist." And so I did. We found the perfect one, but the only problem was it was 2 hours and 30 minutes away from our home. I inquired about it at around 10:30 p.m. I know it was late, but I almost immediately got a response. She sounded very nice over text and asked to see where I lived so that she would feel settled about the kitten living with us. She also insisted on going to their house. I know, I should have just dropped it, but at that time I thought nothing of it. So I sent them a video and we set up a time for the next day to meet. The next day came and I wasn't going to take my fiancé, but he insisted on coming with me because he wanted to be my protection in case, since Craigslist is sketchy. So we drove 2 hours and 30 minutes on our way there. And as we were on our way, I was texting this girl that we would get there on time, and she responded with, "Great, see you then." And we arrived to the home, me in the driver's seat, and my fiancé in the passenger seat with the window down. I texted the girl and I got no response. I called and I got no response too. I ended up calling 5 times and texting in the course of an hour, and there was no response. I went up to the house and knocked on the door, but nothing. There was a car in the driveway, but no response from the number or the door. We got there at 6:30 and we waited until almost 8, but nothing. The neighbor came out asking what was wrong, and I said I'm here since I inquired about a kitten, and she said, "A kitten?" I said, "Yes, it was an ad on Craigslist." And she said, "No one has kittens in this home though." I showed her the ad and she said, "Oh, I know them. They're very sketchy people and they don't own any cats. I just helped them move their furniture yesterday." So I said, "Well, on their ad it says that they have to get rid of their kittens since their new place doesn't allow pets." And then the neighbor answered, "That's impossible. I have a dog and so does the next door over." I immediately found this creepy and assumed the neighbor was also in on something since it was too creepy and I was feeling anxious. I thanked her and I left along with my fiancé. Literally immediately when we pulled out of the street, I got a text from the girl saying, "I'm just now getting your messages. Something must be wrong with my phone. Do you still want the kitten or no?" And I didn't answer and we headed back home. What I don't understand is, they didn't get any money from me, but they asked me to show up not knowing that I'd be with my fiancé. I had a bad feeling about it. What did they want from me? A few years ago, I moved with my family right before I started college. Unfortunately, it was kind of far from the university that I had been accepted into, so I had been trying to find a place to rent close to my university. My dad helped me and showed me an ad on Craigslist. There was a nice looking house for rent and it was close to my university. I decided to set up a meeting to go check out the place. I showed up in the afternoon and unfortunately I was alone. My dad said that I was an adult and a big guy, so I shouldn't worry about meeting this person. This old guy greeted me and then goes, "You'll have to follow me to get to the house for rent." I was confused and I said, "Your ad said that this was the house for rent. Why do I have to go somewhere else?" He says, "This is my house. I'll take you to the one that's for rent." I'm a little concerned at this point and I followed him to his other place. I figured that if things didn't look right, I'd just leave. We get there and I noticed that this house looks bad and it looked like people were in it. I didn't see any other cars around, so this seemed odd. He looks at me and says, "Don't you want to check it out?" I said, "I don't know. This isn't what was in your ad and it looks like other people are there." He tells me that other people are checking it out and I could just join them. Something just felt weird about the whole thing and I told him that I wasn't interested anymore. This place looked in a bad shape from the outside and appeared to have people in the house. When he asked me why I wasn't interested, I told him that it was too far of a drive for school and work. He got mad at me and accused me of wasting his time. I said, "Well, I'm not the one advertising a house and then telling the person it's not the one for rent." He began to glance nervously towards the house and asked if I was sure that I didn't want to check it out. Well, I told him no and then left. He never contacted me again, thankfully. I'm not sure what his intentions were, but something just felt wrong. Maybe he was just trying to show me the house, but I didn't like that he lied about the house to begin with, and that there were other people inside the house. I'm not sure what was going on there, but I didn't really want to find out. I also didn't like how he kept looking at the house when he was asking if I was sure I didn't want to check it out. It seemed so bizarre how he went from being mad at me to getting kind of desperate for me to go inside. A while back when I hit 19, I kind of ended up in a situation where I wanted to get out of my house and get my own place, mostly because I was tired of living with my parents. It was more that I was tired of living by others' rules. I love my parents dearly, I really do, but they were also pretty strict with things, and it was definitely holding back my social life. I'm kind of a free spirit, and I like to be out socializing, but they wanted me home by 8 every night. And that's not me complaining, it's their house, their rules and all. But it was enough to make me realize that I could just move out and get a cheap place nearby, keep them close and make sure that I had my freedom. So, that's what I decided I was going to do. After looking around for a while, I actually found a decent apartment that I could afford with my job that was less than 10 minutes away from where my parents lived. I went through all the motions to get the apartment, paid the deposit, and then got it. Moving day came, and my parents helped me get everything in and set up, and it was at that point that I realized that I didn't have a whole lot, and definitely didn't have enough to fill an apartment. My bedroom had my bed, my desk, dresser, and my living room had a table with a TV on it, and that was pretty much it. I started talking to my dad about it and trying to figure out the list of things that I needed for the apartment or what I could use. And my dad made a suggestion that I should look for cheap furniture on Craigslist. We talked about it for a bit, and he actually mentioned that if I found some stuff for the apartment on Craigslist that would work for me and wasn't terribly expensive, he would go in on half and go with me to get it all. I thought this was a good idea. He had a truck, plus having him with me would make me feel a whole lot safer in dealing with strangers. So I agreed. I told him that I would look online and get a hold of a few people over the next couple weeks, and we would meet up when I had everything ready to go. So I did just that. I got on Craigslist, and I went through a number of postings. I sent a few emails. Some responses I got were obvious scams or bots, so I just ignored those. I had a few people that were interested in selling to me at first, but ended up disregarding me after I told them that it was going to be almost 2 weeks before I could pick it up. Apparently, they weren't willing to wait to sell it, which was fine by me. And after sifting and sending, I was actually able to get a few people that were willing to hold on to their items for me, so at least it wasn't a waste of time. Then, I found a post that was more or less furniture, men's clothing, electronics, and more. I want it all gone, $200. I clicked through the pictures that this person had posted, and looking through it, they were selling a lot of things for such a low price. There were a number of furniture items, a couple game consoles, a decent desktop computer, and then clicking through it, I noticed that some clothes were mostly my size. I was over the moon, thinking that I had hit a jackpot. Sure, it seemed a bit sketchy, but at the same time, if this was legit, I would have furnished my whole place and had a bunch of what would basically be luxury items for only $200. The post had a phone number on it, so I immediately grabbed my cell and called the person. I mentioned the post, and I asked the woman that had answered why she was selling things for so cheap, because it did seem a bit odd. She then said that she and her boyfriend had split up, and that she hadn't seen him for weeks at this point, and all the items she wanted gone were his. She even sent me a few pictures of herself in front of all the items while we were talking to prove that it was all real. I told her that I would give her the asking price for it if she could hold on to it for 2 days, as it was Thursday, before we were supposed to go get the items, and that I would take every single item off of her hands that she wanted to sell. She actually agreed, and she mentioned that I was the first person to call and said that she would go ahead and mark it as sold. I was obviously over the moon. I had just struck Craigslist gold. I called my dad and told him that this lady had a bunch of items that she wanted to get rid of just for $200. And he seemed a bit concerned at first. I explained the situation, mentioned that she had sent me proof that it was all real, and then told him that it was left over from a bad breakup and that the boyfriend hadn't come back for it. It took a bit of extra convincing, but I was able to finally get him to go with it. Saturday morning comes, and I text the woman, mentioning that we would be there within the hour. She responded with an okay, and that was it. Not really the best response, but it was enough for me. We headed to the house, and I was feeling even better about this transaction. The house was nice, like multi-story and well taken care of, so she could afford to just get rid of these things for way under retail value. Kind of nice. We pull into the driveway, walk up to the door, and I ring the doorbell. Nothing. No response. We waited for a little while, but after a couple of minutes with no response, I rang the doorbell again. And still, no answer. I pulled up the initial messages between the two of us to make absolutely sure that this was the address, and it definitely was. I then decided to go ahead and give her a call, and when I did, I could hear the phone ringing inside the house, like just on the other side of the door. I actually glanced over toward the window by the door and started looking inside. My dad chastised me at first, saying that I was being rude, but I had this really weird feeling that something was off. This was a nice house. The woman I spoke with was friendly and seemed like she really was wanting to get rid of these items, and I was really wanting to get the stuff she was selling. Then, I realized why I was feeling off about the whole thing and what I was actually seeing. There was someone lying on the floor just inside the door. I mentioned it to my dad, saying that I think something had happened to the lady. He came over and looked in, and then told me to call 911. And I could tell by his tone that he realized something was definitely wrong. I called them, and I explained the situation to the person on the other end. It was a bit weird having to tell them that we had no idea who this person was, that we were just here to buy stuff, and then tell her that there was a person unconscious on the floor inside the house. It was just as awkward trying to explain it to the first cop that pulled up to the house as well, but I think they understood it better than the dispatcher. And sure enough, the officer agreed that there was a person unconscious in the house, and then decided that that was cause enough to kick the door in and call the medics. They obviously kept us out in the driveway, and we had to answer a lot of questions about why we were here and how we were connected to what was now a crime scene. And after the medics show up, the potential crime scene became a confirmed crime scene. And it became pretty clear how serious this really was. The long short of it, the woman was deceased, and based on how the officer explained it, it was an obvious homicide. Thankfully, I had all the text messages and screenshots of the post to help show that we weren't the one who killed her, but I was also able to explain to them that she had told me about her ex and how they had split up. They ended up taking my information and telling me that they would be in touch with me if they had more questions, and we had to leave at that point. They never called me back or asked me to come in at all. I don't know if they ever ended up solving the case, but it definitely seems like this was a situation where the ex-boyfriend came back and then did the unthinkable. What makes it worse? Part of me still thinks that he may have done it because she was selling his stuff, and that if I hadn't set up the meeting to pick it all up, he may not have done it. But if it weren't me, then someone else would have just jumped on the deal. I don't let it tear me up, but it does bother me a little. I did end up getting a couch for my living room from another seller and also a few other things. But that was the only time that I ever used Craigslist. I know, it's not a common thing to happen, but I didn't want to ever be put in a situation like that again. About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window, which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at that time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, a friendly guy had issues with his work visa and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but I was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off, but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy, but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang out with, but was okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for the month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are normal. But all of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I am woken up at about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. A roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looks me dead in the eye and says, "So, do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and I immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him, and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room, and that he saw me in the side alley out the window arguing with our landlord, whom I've never even seen at this point. And he also said that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. And after staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time, he says he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at that time, and he said that he had seen me talking with our other roommate who's in Hawaii and asking me for the badge number of the officer I'd spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this shit out because I'm not doing anything and don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, call an ambulance," and leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later. And when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the fuck alone and leave for work. I go to work as normal, and I am reluctant to return that night, but I am too tired to switch to an alternate location. Well, big mistake. About 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door, walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. And since my room is dark, he can't see inside. Suddenly he screams, "I can't live like this! Why are you doing this to me?" I think he's on the phone and I don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize that he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the fuck out of there. So I very quietly creep out of bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I hear you!" and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door but not touching the door itself. I look towards my window and see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear against the glass. I was freaking terrified and I sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside my door and not inside my room, so I know that when I leave, I'm going to need a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out of the front door again, at which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on, and run. And as I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams, "Do you want to fucking fight about this? Come out right now, and we'll fight, I swear to God." I'm very small, I'm a 5-foot girl, and this guy is easily 3 times my size, so I am definitely not looking to fight. Thanks. And after a few minutes, he turns off all the lights, and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure, and I can't hear any movement, and then I decide to take my chance. I took a breath and pulled my door open quickly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later and see him standing shirtless with just a pair of boxers and socks on in the dark of the hallway. His arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position, and he says in a low, calm voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no for me, so I grab my shoes and run out of the door with them in hand. I ran about a half block barefoot before I stopped to put them on, and when I look back, he is standing in the porch light of our front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He says he doesn't remember anything that happened or wasn't sure if it was real or not, but if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sends a photo of the house keys sitting on the table and says, "I'm out," and nothing else. I take a friend over there with me to scout it and ensure that he has actually left. When we got there, we discovered that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all of the fire alarms out of the ceilings. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realized that my front door can only lock by using a key from the outside, and it had been locked when we arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. So we called the locksmith immediately. But even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but I also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. And here are the top comments for my last video. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.